All right, let's dive into a hidden chapter of American history. It's a really fascinating story about a government plan to make an entire group of people disappear. But instead, it ended up creating a whole new future for them in the heart of our biggest cities.
You've probably seen this famous photo before, right? Men having lunch on a skyscraper beam way up in the air. But what you might not know is that many of these guys, the legendary Skywalkers, were actually Mohawk ironworkers. I mean, they literally built the New York City skyline that we all know today.
And that really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If Native Americans had such a huge hand in building our most iconic cities, why do we almost never talk about them living there now? We tend to picture them somewhere else entirely, when the reality is they've been an essential part of city life all along. So let's get into the story behind that invisibility.
Well, it wasn't an accident. It all starts with a very deliberate government plan from the middle of the 20th century. A plan that wasn't just about moving people, it was designed to effectively make them disappear from the map.
So this period, from the 50s to the early 70s, is known as the termination and relocation era. Okay, so after World War II, the US government was looking to cut costs. And, they saw their long-standing treaty obligations to Native nations as this expensive problem they wanted to get rid of. Their solution? A big program to move people off reservations and into cities. The guy behind all of this was the BIA commissioner, a man named Dylan S. Meyer. And his core belief was pretty simple and pretty brutal. He thought reservations were overcrowded, they weren't worth investing in, and that the best thing to do was just empty them out. And they weren't exactly subtle about the goal here. This quote just sums it all up, and it's pretty chilling. The thinking was, if you move people into cities where they can assimilate, then you can get out of all your promises. No more reservations, no more treaties, and, in their eyes, no more distinct Indians.
So, how do you get people to go along with a plan like this? Well, you sell it as a golden opportunity. You frame it as a one-way ticket to a brand new and much better life.
The Bureau of Indian Affairs went all out, advertising good jobs, great housing, a real path to prosperity in mainstream America. But for most of the people who took the offer, the reality was a total bait and switch. The jobs were low-end, housing was awful and hard to find, and instead of being welcomed, they ran headfirst into culture shock and racism, all while being totally cut off from their homes and families. And the scale of this was just massive. We're talking about an estimated 100,000 people moved over 2 decades to big cities like Chicago, Denver, and LA. And this is the part that's really key. The BIA's metric for success wasn't, whether people were happy or healthy or had good jobs. Nope. Success was simply whether a person was still in the city after 1 year. It didn't matter what their life was like. As long as they were off the reservation, the government checked it off as a win. They were, for all official purposes, invisible. And this official invisibility, this statistical sleight of hand, it had some major consequences that are still felt today. Because really, if you can't even count a population accurately, how on earth are you supposed to serve its needs? I mean, just look at this. It perfectly illustrates the problem. You have 2 different parts of the government with completely opposite data. The 2020 census says that almost 70% of Native Americans live in cities. But just 3 years before that, a huge report from the Department of Housing and Urban Development said the exact opposite. The numbers are a total mess. So why the giant gap? Well, it basically comes down to a couple of things. First, the census uses a really broad definition. It counts anyone with Indigenous ancestry from anywhere in the Americas. And second, it's all based on how you identify yourself, which is totally different from being an official enrolled member of a federally recognized tribe. And this isn't just some abstract numbers game. This stuff has devastating real-world consequences. Take a look at this chart. Even though most Native people live in cities, the Indian Health Service gives only a tiny 1% of its entire budget to urban clinics. When you're invisible in the data, your needs become invisible too. But this story does not end there, not even close. The government fully expected Native people to just kind of dissolve into the big city melting pot, but instead, something completely unexpected happened. It became an incredible story of resistance and reconnection. So instead of just vanishing, these supposedly invisible people found each other. They were cut off from their specific tribes, so they started building powerful new intertribal communities and movements. The plan to break them apart and assimilate them totally backfired. One of the best examples of this is the Little Earth housing complex in Minneapolis. It started back in 1973, and it's the only subsidized housing project in the entire country with a preference for Native residents. But it's so much more than just housing. It's a cultural hub, a support system. It connects elders with younger generations. It's like a reservation in the middle of the city built by and for the community. And today, Little Earth is home to about 1,000 people from more than 30 different Native nations. Think about that. All these different groups living together, supporting each other. It's a powerful symbol of the new kind of community that rose from the ashes of the relocation era. But this creation of a new, shared urban identity brought up a really complex question that people are still debating today. Is this new unity a good thing? Or does it actually come with a hidden cost? So this idea has a name. It's called pan-indianism. And it's basically a philosophy that promotes unity among all these different Native groups. But it's kind of a double-edged sword. You can see the tension here, right? On one hand, banding together under a common identity creates collective power. It gives you a much stronger political voice, which is absolutely essential. But on the other hand, there's a real danger that the unique cultures, languages, and traditions of hundreds of distinct tribes could get washed out and replaced by one generic Indianness, which ironically is kind of what the government wanted in the first place. But some scholars, like Sydney Ann Beckman, they argue that this whole debate might be missing the point. The question isn't whether Native life is possible in cities. Of course it is. The real fight, she says, is about improving the quality of that life. So, in the end, a government plan to erase a people completely failed. What it did instead, by accident, was forge a new kind of community, one that keeps adapting and thriving. The writer Tommy Orange put it perfectly. The city made us new, and we made it ours. It's just a powerful reminder that culture isn't some static thing in a museum. It's alive, it breathes, and it finds a way to grow, even in the concrete jungle.